So good afternoon, everyone. We appreciate your valuable time and hope and pray that your loved ones are safe and healthy. Yesterday, I was reading this Financial Times, and there was a very important statement by Martin Wolf, who's the chief economic editor, and he said that present economic crisis is clearly the biggest since Great Depression in both size as well as intensity. And the choice is not between containing the virus or rebuilding the economy. The choice should be containing the virus and rebuilding the economy. And this, I think, is extremely important for each one of us. And I think what an extraordinary and terrifying moment for all of us. The remorseless expansion of COVID-19 is happening across the globe. We know from ample research that leadership makes the greatest difference when the world around us is uncertain, when we are unsure about what lies ahead. We will discuss today the challenges leaders face in this new, rapidly unfolding world. From unpredictable political events and unpredictable markets to uncertain realities and the breathtaking pace of technological change. Leaders can turn these immense challenges into remarkable opportunities to lead with openness, authenticity, and most importantly, humility. Yesterday, I was listening to a panel discussion of Sadhguru with CII, and he said something very meaningful, and I wanted to share it with all of you, that we all are experiencing pain. Either we become wounded or we become wise. So I think it is an important time in the world history, and a new history is going to be written. So on behalf of India Healthcare Leadership Forum, we thank each one of you for taking out time. We are very grateful to all our esteemed panelists for taking out time from their busy schedules to share their valuable insights. And we would also like to thank our sponsors, Rexroot Advisors, a leading global executive search firm, for their support in making this knowledge seminar possible. They have recently won the Best Recruitment Agency of the Year award from Economic Times, and they are highly recommended if you want to build your winning team to succeed in this uncertain times. It is my privilege to introduce our first panelist, Mr. Prabal Chakrabarti. I think Prabal does not need introduction, but I'll just try to be brief. Mr. Prabal is the managing partner of Ekesia Advisors, a leading global strategic advisory firm. He comes with a rich experience of over 27 years in the medical device industry, working with companies like Boston Scientific and Johnson & Johnson. He has held several leadership positions in different industry bodies, like chairman of the Medical Device Committee of American Chamber of Commerce in India, co-chair of Confederation of Indian Industry, CII, Indian Advisory Council member of US, and director at Medical Technology Association of India. Being an active member of bodies like FICCI, AdvaMed, and NetHealth, he is helping in shaping the healthcare environment in India. So Prabal, can you please elaborate on impact of this crisis on MedTech industry in next 6 to 12 months, and your key takeaways for MedTech leaders on how they can ensure their organizations can not only survive, but thrive also in this crisis. Over to you, Prabal.
One second. So good afternoon to all of you. And thanks a lot, Gaurav, for the opportunity. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are audible, Prabal.
So let me, there are two parts to your question. I think the first one obviously talks about the impact over the next 6 to 12 months. And the second part, obviously, what would be the key takeaways? And I would love to share some of my thoughts. So first and foremost, let me talk about the impact. So COVID, as we all know, it is not time bound, nor is it bound by geography. So that makes the situation very complex and challenging for the business. So it can happen anytime, it can happen anywhere. The speed and depth of disruption, we all know, it is unprecedented. Now, one of the things that all of us we are hearing now, and that experts are talking about a V and a U-shaped kind of a recovery. But my personal strong belief is that the virus will linger for a longer time, and a W-shaped heterogeneous recovery will happen over the next 1 year till the vaccines are developed. So this pandemic is unique in some ways compared to some of the other crises like 2008 and so on and so forth, that both supply and demand sides have experienced shockwaves. On one hand, health systems have redirected substantial resources to COVID as per government guidelines. On the other hand, elective procedures have declined in a very big way across hospitals as fear has gripped the minds of the patients. Now, hospitals have started losing revenue, profitability, and cash flow is facing tremendous challenge. Development and management of COVID infrastructure is expensive, which is further challenging the survival of the medical facilities. Now, when I'm talking about medical facilities, it includes not only the hospitals, the clinics, path labs, imaging centers. I think all of them are impacted. Now, this is having a serious impact on the MedTech companies, especially those that cater to the elective side of the story. And we all know that many companies actually focus on the elective side, not so much on the COVID products. And there's a substantial focus in terms of revenue and margins on the elective side of things. On the supply side, there have been tremendous challenges with respect to transportation holdups, sporadic raw material supply, ambiguity around government policies across states. And that is something that the MedTech industry has seen over the last several months. And obviously the MedTech companies which are dealing with COVID products, they definitely have an opportunity to really ramp up and redirect capacity towards those products. And we have also seen over the last couple of months that some of the companies are actually going beyond their industry and collaborating with the auto industry to really work on ventilators. And this is not only happening in India, but across the world. So if I have to really summarize the impact, what I would say that sales, profits, cash flow, these are some of the things that over the next 6 to 12 months should be very closely watched. On the supply side, I think things are going to improve because over the last couple of months, the ecosystem has gained a lot of knowledge, collaborating and working together. Tremendous amount of collaboration has happened across stakeholders. And also the industry has worked a lot with the government. And over a period of last couple of months, they've gained a lot of knowledge. And obviously we see a little bit of improvement as we move forward. On the demand side, I obviously, my understanding would be that there would be a gradual improvement. But if you compare a quarter with last year's quarters, the same quarter, then obviously there will be a sharp decline, but gradually we'll see a reduction in the decline as we move from one quarter to the other. And we hope somewhere around first quarter of 2020-21, more near to when the vaccine is developed, we might see some kind of a decent recovery, although a full recovery is not really expected even then. Now, moving to some of the key takeaways, I think first I would like to comment on the supply side. Now, in a crisis situation, it makes a lot of sense to work together as an industry rather than individual companies to resolve issues with different stakeholders. Now, CII, FICCI, and Badri is here as the chair of FICCI MedTech. CII and FICCI MedTech committees have done a great job, and organizations should take their help in the coming days. Now, they have a terrific reach, all these industry bodies across the country, and this can help in moving products in the supply chain. And we all know that healthcare is a state subject, and coordination between center and state is very, very important. Now, moving over to the demand side. Now, decline in elective procedures will remain a key concern, though surges in demand, pent-up demand, is possible. Now, patients are scared of visiting hospitals lest they contract COVID. The hospitals have to figure out ways to give back the confidence to patients. And this is what I'm talking about is post 3rd of May. So they have to figure out ways to give back the confidence to patients about the safety measures. Today, some of the hospitals have started, treating every patient as a suspect COVID patient. So the question that I would like to raise out here is that can MedTech industry collaborate with hospitals, clinics, testing labs to facilitate the confidence building exercise? It will be a terrific customer focused approach and can play an important role in building long-term relationship. Now, many hospitals and organizations have huge receivables with the government schemes like CGHS, and industry bodies are working and should keep on working together to engage with the government on this important issue, as it is really choking the cash flow of the hospitals. And thereby the MedTech industry is getting impacted as it's a hospital where the rubber really meets the road. Cash preservation will be very important to tide over the situation. Sales projections should be brutally honest. Regular cash flow forecasting, stringent receivables and inventory management, alternate contracting would be the need of the hour. Credit lines should be drawn wherever possible. Investment should be recalibrated and fixed costs should be pruned. However, here I would like to comment that cash-rich organizations have a serious advantage. Today I was reading that Medtronic is sitting on a cash reserves of almost more than $11 billion. And they're continuing with full capacity manufacturing, readying for things to improve so that they're in a position to supply globally. And also this gives an opportunity for mergers and acquisitions. Now, commenting on the supply chain, I think repositioning of inventory to areas of greatest need is going to be very, very important. There are many hospitals and nursing homes the beds are absolutely vacant, whereas there are hospitals where still a lot of elective procedures are happening. And it is important for the MedTech industry to make sure that the products reach the right place so that the healthcare benefits are maximized. Alternate supply chain initiatives should be adopted. Organizations still having linear supply chain model should plan to move to digital supply networks, which provides end-to-end visibility. This is very important in a crisis pandemic scenario. Paper-based processes should change to digitization. Who knows when the next pandemic is really due. Commenting on leadership and people, at this stage, more than a visionary style of leadership, an institutional holding style of leadership which acknowledges distress and difficulty without giving into powerlessness would be appropriate. Sensitivity, empathy, and compassion would be very important in dealing with employees. Honest, consistent, and adaptive communication is the need of the hour. Pain should be shared, and teamwork would be key in finding solutions to the challenges. To conclude, I would like to say that as we journey through this crisis, innovative and cost-effective processes and systems have to be developed in parallel to manage the relationship between customer and the brand. Pre-pandemic segmentation may become obsolete. Healthcare may look very different post-COVID. It would be important to start shifting investments to the digital space. This would position the organization on a higher pedestal for the current and the future. So thanks, Gaurav. Over to you.
I think excellent insights, Prabal. And it will take some time for actually all of us to absorb these valuable insights. But I think one or two key points which I can take out from this is the brutally honest about your sales. And I think which I remember is sales is vanity, profit is sanity, but cash is reality. So I think very, very important in these trying times that cash flow will be very critical, and we need to be very brutally honest about our sales projections. And simultaneously, the companies, I think, which are sitting on a lot of cash will have a distinct competitive advantage. So a lot of points, I think, which you have given, and these are key takeaways for the leaders who can actually go out into the field from maybe tomorrow and can implement. So I think we really thank you. And now we welcome our next esteemed panelist, Ms. Achal Khanna. Achal is the CEO of SHRM India and Business Head, Asia Pacific and MENA. SHRM, Society of Human Resource Management, has 300,000, 3 lakh plus HR and business executive leaders as members globally. And it impacts 115 million plus employees worldwide. She has received the Best Woman Executive in India award. She has over 30 years of rich working experience. She was earlier the Managing Director of Kelly India Operations, Vice President of GE, and Country Manager for Polaroid India, and has worked with ITC and Cosmo Group in various leadership capacities. Achal, since this crisis is becoming the accelerator for one of the greatest workplace transformations of our lifetime, in your opinion, how will this massive transformation impact the workplace? Please share your insights on how human resource leaders can successfully navigate these unprecedented times and successfully adapt to new normal. Over to you, Achal.
Thank you, Gaurav, and thanks everybody for joining this wonderful webinar. So what I would say is, yes, it is extremely tough time. But then in tough times, you need to get tougher. And I personally would say is that it is a good opportunity also to be a true leader, you know, and right now, most of the industries are facing a challenge of work from home and challenges of cash. As just now Gaurav mentioned, you know, hospitals, and my fellow panelist mentioned that hospitals are under tremendous pressure of cash. They are not at their full capacity. Same is the challenge ITS industry facing. Same is the challenge we all are facing. So we need to first and foremost is adopt the new norms. Is working from home? Yes, that is a new norm. And we have been working from home for last 1 month. Yes, it took some time, but now the productivities are coming, are improving. Also, I have seen the shift which is happening is most of the leaders and the company leaders specifically are becoming very, very transparent. And the new word which they have learned and they are realizing it, the greatest talent which they have is not technology, not leaders, but their people. And they need to protect their people. So they are at this juncture when there is a cash challenge, when there is a challenge of where the next meal is going to come from. Most of the big and small and medium-sized industries are investing in their people because they know that if they don't value their people, the productivity will be lost. And yes, you know, I mean, Rex Recruit is there to hire, but still, you know, they need to protect their people. The new norm is you need to be very, very sensitive to the people's need. There is a study which has come out which would shock everybody, and it is a global scenario. Working from home has increased the domestic violence. So, you know, we really, really need to empathize and educate people. So we have moved everything to virtual. There are virtual coaching sessions going on. There are virtual training sessions going on. And most of the companies are really investing in that. It is irrespective of any industries. SHRM has invested in a research, and I would be more than happy to share with you how to deal with the new norms. There are toolkits which are available, how to deal, how as a HR leader, how as a functional leader, how as a business leader, you need to deal. Can anybody hear me? Because I am off Zoom. Hello?
We are able to hear you loud and clear.
Okay, okay. So what I was saying was that we have done enough and more research on it, on how to be more productive in this new norms, how as not only the HR leader, but as a business leader, as a people manager, you need to empathize with your workforce, be their coach, be their advisor, and help them in do their job better. That is a true leader. Second thing, which we have already started the research on how once the lockdown open, how we would be able to going back to work. It would be, means once you're locked down for 2 months or something like that, going back to work is going to be a great challenge. So we have prepared a great toolkit. Again, I would be more than happy to share the details of that to help the organizations. And it is industry wise. It is not, just one shoe which fits all. How healthcare industry needs to deal with this situation, how ITS industry should need to deal with this situation. So all that work at the back end SHRM is doing. SHRM is a not-for-profit association. We spend around $30 to $40 million on research to support the industries, to support the people managers on how to be more productive. My message to the people who are attending is, which is, yeah, as Gaurav mentioned about Sadhguru, we need to keep our faith up and fear down. COVID is an unknown fear which we are all grappling with, but our faith, collective faith, is very, very powerful, and that is what we need to communicate with to our team members. No, we will come out of it. There have been so many crises. Yes, this is a tough one, and the research shows that we will not be able to get out of it for next 18 months. The world, I see the optimism here is it has brought, all said and done, the world together. It is questioning China why they did not, all the organizations like WHO, why they did not, they were not responsible enough. So I would say is we need to see opportunity. We need to be transparent to our people. We need to help, support, and guide them in this kind of a turbulence time, and keep our faith high. And also another thing which I strongly believe in, that our dreams don't perish. Storms go away. So this is a storm which has come. It sounds like a fairy tale story, but storms don't last. We all know it. And our dreams don't perish. So India as a country, since it is, I'm a very patriotic Indian, I think so there are enough and more opportunities right now in India, and we would come out as a true winner. But yes, my humble request to everybody is, yes, cash is king, but right now it is most of the companies, in the companies, the compassion which has come, most of the leadership team have taken a salary cut, and they have not let the frontline people suffer. Most of the leadership teams have taken no bonus, no increments, and that is standard across all industries. But compassionate with the people who need those extra rupees to survive. So that's all. Unless there is a question, I would be more than happy to answer. This is a challenging time. We as leaders need to be accountable. We as leaders need to be collaborative. We as leaders need to be flexible and agile and supportive of our workforce. The new norms would be, yes, virtual. The new norms would be like, in India, we never ever bothered about hygiene and cleanliness. If somebody is suffering from cold, we said, okay, doesn't matter, it is just a cold. He can be sitting in the office. But now everybody will be cautious. Everybody will be hygiene conscious at home as well as workplace. So these would be the new norms which will come and which would help us to make the workplaces better, and better workplaces for better tomorrow. That's from my end.
I think, again, wonderful thoughts and very, very insightful thoughts that you have shared. And we are getting a lot of very positive comments from on the chat. You can see on the insights that you have shared. And I think about the resources that are available with SHRM, I would request each one of the attendees who are here on this chat, and also people who are onto the YouTube live streaming, they can actually go onto the shrm.org website, and it's a non-profit organization, and they have done some incredible work on this COVID-19 impact on the workplace, how you can ensure the safety of your employees, the mental well-being of the employees, and a lot of other areas they have done their work. And all these resources are available for you to go there and utilize them. And I think I would request each one of you to visit their website and maximize this opportunity. So really thankful. And when I was listening to you, I just remembered again one of very good quote that I was reading somewhere, that this is the time to sit back, look at our lives, reflect, strategize the trajectory of what we want our life to be, and above all, realize the fragile nature of our existence. So I think very important that we have some reflection, and we all should agree now that we have a fragile nature. So with this, I would like to now go on to our next panelist, which is Badri. And with great pleasure, I introduce Badri. Badri is currently the cluster managing director for Smith & Nephew for South Asia and Southeast Asia. He is also the chairman of FICCI Medical Devices and governing council member of NetHealth. He is a veteran in medical devices and diagnostic industry with over 25 years of work experience. Prior to this, Badri has worked as regional director, Boston Scientific, responsible for Middle East, Africa, and Turkey. So, Badri, very specifically in your illustrious professional career, you have successfully led your organization through many crises globally. I know that you have been handling Middle East, you have been handling Africa. So you have seen the Saudi oil crisis, you have seen the Indonesian currency crisis, you have seen the Syrian issues which have impacted our business, and a lot of African issues and challenges that have happened. So I'm not saying that wherever you go, there the issues happen. I'm just saying that you have successfully managed a lot of issues. So I think if you can share your learnings, which will help leaders to successfully lead through these uncertain times. And also what I would request, Badri, if you can highlight the recovery plan to succeed in new normal, because it is very important that now we will be, I think slowly gradual opening will happen, and this lockdown will be gradually in phases maybe opened. So as leaders, I think it is very important for us to have a recovery plan. So over to you, Badri.
Sure. Thank you, Gaurav, for the opportunity. So I think we have moved into a world where knowledge of the present and ignorance of the future is same for everyone across the world. So hence there is no one who's a novice or no one who's an expert in a world of experiential learning as we see ahead. So in the last, I think the question that you asked, saying that I have worked in Middle East, Africa, Turkey, and Southeast Asian regions. I've been fortunate to see and be a part of the VUCA world from very close quarters for about 9 out of my 25 years of plus experience. And be it the managing business in the middle of the Iraq, the Syria, the Libya war, or be it the parallel economy of Egypt, the US sanctions in Iran, huge currency falls. So for example, in South Africa, the 3 years that I was in managing South Africa and Turkey, the rand to a dollar in South Africa was 7, moved to 13 in 3 years. And likewise, the lira, Turkish lira, moved from 1.6 to 2.5. So, and despite all of these challenges, I think the most important piece was how do you successfully grow the business? And we managed to kind of in that period with the oil crisis in Saudi, Iraq, etc., we managed to still grow the business pretty substantially. And I'm just going to share 3 very simple philosophies. And I think some of it was touched by Prabal, some of it was touched by Achal, but very simple philosophies which would enable us to navigate in the difficult world. So first one is around leadership requirements in a new normal. Okay. And this is something which I have lived and I swear by it, because this is something which has helped to succeed in these very, very turbulent times of businesses that I have seen. So the first bit of leadership requirements in new normal is zero reset. When I say zero reset, what it means is that leaders have to reset their past experiences and not cloud their ability to say, I know this, I have seen this. Because what the situation presents at different points of time in a geopolitically unstable situation or in a COVID-like situation is very, very different. And the solutions that is going to come up has to be very different than what has been applied in the past. So leadership reset calls to unlearn, relearn, and adapt in a new situation. There are leadership instincts that one has to go by, and there are also calibrated data that one needs to use to look at trends, etc. Okay, so that you could basically readjust and recalibrate yourself to the new world. The second one, I think I agree with what Achal mentioned, saying that how do leaders be empathetic? How can they keep their calm, be confident, trust, compassion, stability? These are absolutely must. The most important, most significant is constant communication with your teams. So just to give you an example, I think within our organization, we have a CEO -2 level, a president -2 levels, a MD -2 levels, and a leadership team -2 levels at every cluster that's going on to ensure that people are aware of what is changing in this dynamic, and what does it mean for us, and what is expected out of us. Okay, and this is not something which is theoretical. It happens every week, and you have to ensure that I wouldn't but overemphasize the importance of communication in a difficult world. The third one, for I think most of you who miss IPL, I potentially look at a word called IPPL, which is to do with leadership influence through participation and purpose-driven leadership. Okay, so how do you look at this new normal from a perspective of getting your teams involved, getting your teams to know the purpose of why we are doing what we are doing? So, for example, outreach, community outreach in difficult times, especially in COVID, people don't want to go out and get contaminated for the social distancing reasons. But how do you yet find a way to ensure that you give meaning to the purpose? So, for example, as a company, we have associated ourselves with Halftime, and we are trying to get with one of the cancer NGOs and also with the PM Cares, so that different aspects of society are able to be touched by the fact that the reason for our existence is also to support community-based initiatives. The last, which is a hard part of the leadership, is on the cash. Okay, and this is to be moving away from the concept of percentage margin to gain liquidity, because companies which survives and companies which don't, the difference between them is the cash. And I think Prabal mentioned in his opening bar that Medtronic today sits on $11 billion of cash, and hence they are able to do a lot more than others because it's in a cash situation. So these are the 4 things that I think from a leadership perspective, the first bucket in a difficult world one needs to kind of look at. The second one, which is very crucial, is around strategic outlook in a new normal. So Prabal gave the background of a V, a U, and a L. A V where whatever is the loss that happened due to COVID, the economy recovers. U, where whatever losses happen, they are gone, the damage is done, but the economy recovers in a U-shaped recovery. L, the economy has gone through whatever is the COVID impact. There is long period to get it recovered. And basis the fact that for at least up to Q2 or Q3 of 2021, we don't see any drug coming up, or the piece around herd immunity coming up, I think W looks more imminent. So the 2 aspects on strategic outlook which every company should consider is, the first one is something known as BCP. business continuity planning. And business continuity planning is all about taking a W, taking a V, and taking a U, and saying, how do we look at these scenarios and do a top to bottom line impact? And then for each of these, what is it that we are going to be working upon in terms of managing sales, managing SG&A, managing profitability? The second one is around hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst. And this is where upstream management of each of the scenarios in terms of conversations and engagement, and downstream, how do you create, working with your teams, strategies which would ensure that you have the best leveraging possible SG&A and you manage cash well. So these are two things under the strategic outlook in a new normal that one need to keep in mind. The last but not the least is on execution. And in execution, there are three important buckets that we need to touch upon: customer, organization and people, and partnerships. Okay. On the execution front, one of the things which is really kind of, as an example, I think all of us know is when SARS happened, what happened to the digital economy? China post SARS moved into online, and you got an Alibaba, a unicorn, right? So when you look at customers in terms of such historical events, there has always been a behavior change. And HIV led to a behavior change of condoms. SARS led to Alibaba in terms of online. So I think in the last 4 weeks, just as we are on webinars, I have at least seen close to 2,500 to 3,000 webinar invite requests that customers have made from across sectors: cardiology, cardiac surgery, orthopedics, you name it, from across sectors. So in an execution mode, when you look at your strategy and say a WVU, and you have to conserve SG&A, I think the future is going to be more around digital medical education and virtual conferences, if I were to call it, than the in-person based conferences which we have seen so far. So on customer, I think the whole SG&A would move towards a digital norm, entire digital infrastructure on customer management. The second is on organization and people. Let me first talk about people. There is a beautiful concept by Olander and Thogerson, which talks about MOA. Okay, and it is very relevant specifically in difficult situations, because that's the key to understand. The MOA is nothing but motivation, opportunity, and ability in terms of how you manage people. Motivation is around creating the right environment for people. Opportunity is basically giving space, giving stage. You will see a lot of younger leaders coming up, willing to take difficult assignments and say that I would try to maximize this opportunity differently than what others are doing. So giving them stage, giving them space. And the third one is around ability. The ability is around, have you trained people? Have you empowered people? Have you moved people with the right competencies? So in the last, I think, 4 to 5 weeks, this has been something which we have been doing with our global and regional teams online to ensure our teams are trained and get new competencies. So this is around how you look at people. From an organization perspective, I think the organizations will move very differently ahead in terms of conserving SG&A. You would have a lot of digital natives entering into the work stream, agile teams, and project-based gig workforces, which would basically join in for a project. Once the project is done, people are out. Yeah, this is around the second one. So first was customer, second was organization and people, and the MOA concept. The third one is around partnerships. So Prabal spoke about, and also Gaurav spoke about, how from a healthcare perspective and from an industry perspective, we are working together. So the provider group, the pharmaceutical group, medical device group, medical equipment group in the entire healthcare space, even to that extent, health insurance companies. So we are working together on partnerships with regards to framing policies with the government. So ever since COVID happened, I think the borders were closed. The government did a great job on lockdown, right? All of these had impact. The impact basically was around lives and livelihoods both, but I think the economic impact is what could potentially move some companies towards bankruptcy and joblessness, right? So how do you influence and work with the government to ensure that across industry in healthcare, we take care of each other? So in the last 7 weeks, I think out of 700 plus FICCI submissions that we made, about 192 submissions were and recommendations were considered by the government. And what this means is that we have a very, very responsive government and we have a very responsive healthcare industry, which is partnering with each other to ensure that we have policies which are directional in nature and which enable us to ensure that what we want to execute to get cash, to get liquidity for survival and ensuring jobs are retained, that happens. The other piece around, I think, policies and partnerships that is likely to happen is around local dependence. I think there would be a lot of ask from the government. So while governments are today collaborating on finding the COVID drug, but they are also competing on ensuring that each country becomes self-sufficient. So it's a paradox, opposing paradox, but it's important that we understand which way we need to head. And as an industry, we are trying to work with the government to come up with a policy which has a gradual phasing to ensure that it's a win-win in terms of local dependence and companies coming to invest back into India. So I think these are three very local important considerations to understand. One, leadership requirement in a new normal. Second one is the strategic outlook in a new normal. And the third one is the execution around customer, around people, and around partnerships. Yeah. So over to you, Gaurav. So one last point is, as we just move away from a just-in-time concept, just-in-time world, to a just-in-case one, okay? I think these perspectives, these three perspectives, I hope does a lot of justice to some of the leaders on the call and upcoming leaders to be able to kind of make meaningful contribution to steer organizations to new success, yeah? Thanks.
I think great insights, Badri, as always. And we are getting so much of positive feedback. And a lot of people are liking your insights. And I think they will assimilate and reflect on what you have said. All this recording will also be available on the YouTube channels. So people can actually look at the YouTube channel and later on, because so much of good information that you have shared. And particularly, I liked your concept about motivation, opportunity, and ability, the MOA concept. I think that is wonderful. And I think listening to you, what comes to my mind is we all as leaders, I think now need to practice compassionate capitalism. I think compassionate capitalism is the need of hour, and we all need to consciously practice this in our businesses. So I will now welcome our next esteemed panelist, Dr. Shri Harsha Achar. Dr. Achar brings HR experience spanning 34 years, cutting across multiple industries. He is currently the president resource at HDFC Ergo. He was a former group CHRO at Apollo Hospitals and was associated with Apollo Munich Health Insurance Company as executive director, chief people officer, and member of the board of management. Dr. Shri Harsh, I think you will agree that this is an exceptional moment for HR leaders. Exceptional in the challenges it presents, in its complexity, in its ambiguity, and its opportunity. Human resource leaders are being tested as never before in this crisis. It is truly their moment to shine. If you remember in 2008, most of the crisis was handled by the CFOs. The financial heads were leading the crisis.
Right.
Now is truly the moment of CHROs to shine, as they are providing an invaluable service to their companies and communities in this difficult time. And I would request you to please share your valuable insights. Over to you, Dr. Shreyash.
Right. Thank you, Gaurav. And thanks to all the panelists. Wonderful information that's coming. A lot to ruminate upon and take corrective actions as we go forward. Yes, indeed, it's an unprecedented and unimaginable moment. So the mantra, in my view, over the next few quarters will be reboot, reinvent, and restart. So we have all found better ways of doing things. So let's be sure things will be different at home, at work, and in between. I'm also keenly observing the response of the younger generations to this crisis. I think somebody mentioned it on the webinar as of now. And while their headline feelings are caution, anxiety, and fear, these generations are the ones who will display flexibility, agility, and resilience and transform the future of work. Yes, you're right, Gaurav, when you said HR heads are at the forefront in this context today, because everything is related to work, workforce, and workplace. So remote working and digitalization is here to stay. The shackles have been broken. So very staunch supporters of you have to work in office have overnight changed their mind, saying everything can happen from home, which is a very welcome sign. Habit change is here to stay. Repeated cycles or the volatile dance or what I call Corona Tandav or its next avatars are here to stay. So from an HR perspective, there are a number of takeaways, and I have divided it into 4 quarters: the short, medium, long, and very long term. So it's 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. So in the short time, I think it will be people first, economics second, and making family life easier for employees, because confinement burnout is a large possibility. Many people are already facing this. Come Q2, you will have to start rating your employees as required to be in office and required to be at home, and schedule less people as and when the government clears the road back to normalcy. Q2 will also make us revise our real estate policies, our business strategy, our business model, and somebody also said on the webinar, the BCP policy going forward, because these black swan events may continue into the future as well. Q2 will also bring in a lot of focus on mental health, personal finance, stress, and social isolation. They have become urgent from important over the last 4 weeks. Employee assistance plans will garner greater momentum. In our own organization and many other organizations that I've been talking to, the flow into the employee assistance program, particularly counseling, is seeing an uptake. So what used to have about 15-20% usage now has gone up to about 30-40%. Q3 will see a relaxation in a few rules, both at the regulatory level, at the government level, and obviously at the organizational level as well. Now, we must remember it's a pandemic and not a productivity contest at this point in time, because there are many organizations and individuals who are hell-bent on showing each other who is working more. So it's time to reflect and reimagine and not get creatively compromised. In the rush to get business back on track, business will come back on track. But we've got to be ready like a goalkeeper or a wicket keeper, because you really don't know which way the future is headed, to the right or to the left. So it's better to have a central tendency at this point in time so that you are able to flex on both sides like a wicket keeper or a goalkeeper. Having said that, there is a need to decentralize authority and decision making by Q4 and prioritize productivity, as that drives profits and profits drive employment. But technology needs to be hosted for this. And I think it will take a few months for the IT heads to kind of put their heads together and see how this new normal can still be workable. Well, the elephant in the room will be job losses. Nobody is talking about it in the open. The sooner it comes out, the better it is for all. As you said, Gaurav, the crisis of 2008-9 was CFO-led. The crisis of today is being led by CHROs and CEOs on 3 fronts: work front, workforce front, and workplace front. A life after COVID is not just changing people. It's changing how we work and altering the priorities of organizations, both big and small. It'll all come down to how we will implement all that we are talking about and thinking about. And as the old adage goes, it's all about execution will still hold good. So in my view, the solutions at the end of the day will be a mix of sweet, bitter, salty, and spicy. To conclude, let's not count days. Let's make the days count and use this time to focus energies on reimagining the future, both at home, office, and in the social side of it. Finally, I would like to end by saying we are in the same storm, but we are on different boats. So approaches and solutions will vary by organization, by sector, by domain. Thank you so much. Back to you.
Thanks, Dr. Shersha. It is always a pleasure to listen to you. And I think you have actually broken down everything quarter-wise. So it is very meaningful for our friends, our leaders who are on this chat and people who are on the YouTube live streaming. They can actually go back and implement these key takeaways. So thanks for that. And I think this was really, and I'm just reading from the chat where Indrani is saying it is brilliant, Dr. Shri Harsha, and a lot of very positive comments. So I think thanks as always.
Thank you.
And
pleasure.
Before I think I proceed to my next panelist, I will just request on behalf of all the panelists, most of our participants are representing the healthcare industry. And also we all know that this crisis, it is being led from the front by our healthcare warriors, which we are also saying as COVID warriors. So on behalf of all the panelists, I would like to appreciate all the friends who are on this panel, the doctors, and also people who are from the healthcare industry. And I think we appreciate each one's effort who are putting their life on risk and not even thinking about their own loved ones, but going out and serving the society. So this is a real thanks from each one of us. And we really salute your leadership in this critical hour. So
we should have a virtual hand clapping.
Yeah, hand clapping.
Yeah, absolutely. We can do that. And thumbs up to them.
Yes. So I'll now go on to our next panelist, Sakshi Jethi. So Ms. Sakshi is the managing director of Recruit, which is a global healthcare search firm. She is a Wharton Business School alumni and has over 2 decades of experience in human resource and operations across various leading healthcare organizations. She has recently won the prestigious Woman Icon of the Year 2019 by Economic Times. So Sakshi, as you had emphasized in the last webinar on the importance of compassionate leadership in the times of crisis, and how the COVID-19 crisis does not necessarily have to lead to employee layoffs. How can employers communicate and share the pain with their employees at this time? How can we practice compassionate leadership? Because if you see all the previous panelists, I think before you are talking about having compassion while dealing with this crisis. This is an unprecedented crisis, even much, much larger and severe in economic terms than Great Depression that the world has seen. And I think it's a very serious crisis that we all are facing. But in this crisis, how do we practice compassionate leadership is what we want to understand from you. Over to you, Sakshi.
First of all, thank you, Mr. Gaurav, IHLF, and my co-panelists for giving me an opportunity to share my thoughts in such a prestigious forum. I will start with a quote by the Dalai Lama, where he rightly said that if you want to be happy, practice compassion. And if you want others to be happy, then also practice compassion. So it is a very important time where compassion is required, and it will be an important manifestation of leadership. Compassion is not empathy. We all need to understand that there is a difference between compassion and empathy. So compassion is defined as empathy plus action. Compassion is putting yourself in the shoes of other person and seeing the world through their lens and then taking an action. Managing compassionately is not just a better way to build a team, but it is also a better way to build a company. What we are all hearing is that many companies are considering layoffs as their main strategy of cost optimization to ensure their survival through the crisis. A cost-cutting reflex is definitely understandable, and leaders are obligated to make responsible decisions to keep their companies afloat. But we humbly request you to exhaust all other options before you lay off even a single employee. Those leaders who manage the economic effects of this crisis in a clear and compassionate way will create more values for their companies, and they will come out to be much stronger in this pandemic situation. So before announcing layoffs, we would recommend that you consider these measures first. First, as everybody has been saying, Badri also said, Achal ma'am also very, very clearly said, communicate openly. Many leaders assume that if they admit that the company is facing a turbulent time, it will scare away its best of the employees. But today, everybody understands that there is a problem. We are into a pandemic situation. It can lead to financial chaos. So instead of forcing your employees to second guess, be utterly clear with them about the financial health of your firm and what goals you want to prioritize. They will all understand because everybody is educated. They all understand what is required. Secondly, I would like to highlight is share the pain. It is very important that if you are doing cutbacks to save jobs, you must lead by an example. As a CEO, it is, I think, it is much required that you should take the largest salary cut yourself, because that will help save many jobs. We've seen it across industries. It is happening in many airlines and other companies, but it is the need of the hour, because a salary of a CEO will encompass the salary of many employees. Second, then the third most important thing is we can consider crowdsourcing ideas with the employees. Unleashing their collective wisdom will require compassionate leadership. It can be overwhelming to open the floor for ideas from employees on what the company should do. But in our experience, it will be critical that you ask your employees to voice their ideas. By this way, you will not lose control. It will actually enhance your standing as a leader, because they will be happy that their ideas are being welcomed and they are being heard too. It is very, very important to communicate to the employees, be very open, be very practical. What I will like is review all the options, even maybe the less conventional ones. Before layoff, consider all the non-obvious options for cost reductions, like maybe a 4-day week work, half-time work for some employees. They might agree to work half-time if they understand that that might save jobs of many other employees. You can also offer employees an opportunity for unpaid leaves if they wish to do that. You can consider deaccelerating pay decreases for lower salary ranges to protect these employees who are most vulnerable. So maybe if you have a tendency, then the people who are getting the lower salary can be considered in a 10% salary cut, and the senior employees can go up to 30 or 35%, depending on the company policy. And I will again like to highlight, again, I'm saying in this webinar, loyalty is a two-way street. When you treat the employees well, they will definitely reciprocate to the organization and to the employer. Very, very important, and I'll say last but not the least, have ice in the belly. Being a leader in the turbulent time can be actually nerve-wracking. If you act too fast, it might turn out to be overreacted. If you act too slow, then the business might go under. So it would be wise to have what is a Swedish saying that is in Magen, that is ice in the belly, roughly translated as your ability to keep cool in such a critical situation. The COVID-19 situation, we all know, is unprecedented time. It is full of uncertainties, and leaders are struggling to find the right solution as the context changes almost every hour. No more than ever, leaders need to draw upon all available resources, most particularly their people. utilizing their collective intelligence of experience and knowledge while adapting and revising solutions as the situations unfolds. I would finally like to conclude by saying a distinctive feature of enduring companies is the way their leaders react to moments like these. You should avoid false optimism, be clinically realistic, and act decisively as circumstances change. Demonstrate compassionate leadership. Your team actually needs this during this stressful time, and you will be able to touch the lives of your employees in an extraordinary way. And it will help you come out of this potential slowdown stronger than ever before, enhancing the shared values of your staff. That's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Excellent points, Sakshi. I think fantastic points that you have put across, and some of them which have clearly, immediately key takeaways, which I feel is one is empathy is not equal to compassion. And I think that is a very, very important point. Compassion is equal to empathy plus action. So you need to actually keep yourself into the feet of other people and actually look at the situation. And second, I think this I will use in my future maybe discussions, that we don't require right now fire in the belly, but ice in the belly. So I think the mindfulness, the compassion that we require in today's crisis will build a long-term loyalty in our workforce. They are all looking at us. They are looking, is the first cost cutting, cost optimization measure is the easiest one, which is layoff, or companies exhausting all other resources and then looking it as a last option. So this is a very tough time, and you have said very clearly that leaders also have to take accountability. They have to be very realistic, clinically realistic. So I think you are not saying that it cannot be an option. It can be an option, but after we exhaust all other options. So fantastic talk, and I think we are really grateful to have you on this panel. So now we move on to our next panelist, Sunil, who is Sunil Thakur. Sunil is the managing director at Quadria Capital. He has over 17 years of private equity and investment banking experience across South and Southeast Asia. He has led and executed 30 plus transactions valued over $7 billion across merger and acquisition, capital markets, and project finance, including some of the award-winning and marquee cross-border transactions. Quadria Capital, I think a lot of you know, has recently raised around $600 million fund for healthcare-focused deals. So my question to you, Sunil, is as you represent Quadria Capital, which is Asia's leading healthcare private equity fund, and with significant investments in India, how do you think this Black Swan event will impact private equity players' short and long-term investment strategy? What are the key investment opportunities emerging out of this unprecedented crisis? Over to you, Sunil.
Thank you, Gaurav, and good evening to all the panelists and all the participants on this webinar. It certainly is a black swan event. I don't think there is any doubt about this, and that's relevant even for the lens that we are looking through as a private equity investor. See, if I take you back of how private equity investors work, we create themes for investments, and most of them are created through the lens of any entrepreneur or industrialist, people who are actually dreaming, creating visions, and executing those business plans. So if I have to look at this event through the lens of entrepreneurs, professionals who are there on the ground, I can take a cue from whatever I've heard from the other panelists who come from the industry, and some of the common themes or data points that are coming out are that there is no parallel to this particular event. There is no template to sorting out the issues that we are facing and that we will be facing. It's not the old order, the new order has to come in. The second point that I kept hearing was that there is a disruption of the existing order. There will have to be realignments. But at the same time, what I also heard is there is significant amount of opportunity that will come out of this event. And one important thing that will become the big part of new order is going to be digitization. So these are, the common points that I heard, and that's relevant from a private equity investors, both from how to manage the situation and the opportunity set that we would look at. So now, if I was to sit back and look at the entire event and see, where I need to deploy the money, I would look at both from the lens of how do I manage the current situation, how do I allocate capital to the current situation, and then think about, what could be the new order. And that is the way most other private equity investors would think or are thinking. And just in terms of the quantum, if I tell you, we are sitting on a $2 trillion of dry powder in the private equity industry. It won't vanish. A large part of it might, go in for a slow investment. But there is significant amount of dry powder which is sitting there, and most people would think exactly the way as I suggested or I mentioned, that people would look at. So if I can divide the mindset, of a private equity investor, there would be one set of investors who would be in the wait and watch bucket. There would be investors who would be more concerned about their existing portfolio companies. The entire focus would be on how to manage and see that there is liquidity, solvency, and also an opportunity that the existing portfolio companies may take. So how do we fund those situations for our existing portfolio? And the third bucket would be investors who would look at the opportunity that is there as part of the current event, and more importantly, opportunities that will be part of the new order that will come out. So that's broadly how most private equity investors would think. So overall, if you were looking at a $2 trillion dry powder, you can imagine that a bulk of it is going to get invested either in existing portfolio companies or in future opportunities. Now, if I talk about the future opportunities, that we will see, there is a common theme and there are common drivers. So without naming specific industry, if I will just to talk about what themes and drivers one would see in healthcare industry that would drive opportunities. It is going to be models that will provide access. It will be models that is going to harness the current behavioral change that everybody is going through. More importantly, the way we are doing this webinar is a big behavioral change. Models that are going to sort out resource issues, as we've been dealing with, this whole demand supply, in the healthcare. This has been very acute in the current situation. So models that are going to bridge this whole resource mismatch will find a lot of takers. Models that are going to provide convenience to all the stakeholders. So starting from customers or patients, starting from hospitals, pharma companies, convenience has become the order of the day. Today everybody now wants that everything should be supplied with the tap on the phone. Models that are going to cater to safety and quality. More on safety. If I was to just look at India as an economy, models that are going to back business continuity plan. Something that Badri and a few other panelists mentioned. Business continuity plan is going to be very, very important. Everybody, each and every industrialist is going to go back and see, how do we avoid a crisis, if something of this sort had to happen again. Models of self-reliance. This is going to be a big push from government, as if you heard Prime Minister Modi day before yesterday, the point that he made was, the biggest lesson for him has been to be self-reliant. So self-reliant models are going to be the order of the day. Patient therapy continuity programs, especially for chronic, there has been a complete breakdown in the entire therapy continuity program for most of the patients. So any model, so digital therapy, if I was to take, is going to become something of vogue in the coming days, and wellness. So these are the 8 to 9 themes or drivers that will drive opportunities. Now, the opportunity can come in various shapes and forms, but these are going to be the big themes that most private equity investors in the healthcare space are going to go after.
Thanks. I think a lot of very, very, very valuable inputs. And I think I will agree with you, Sunil, that this chaos or crisis will bring unprecedented investment opportunities, because every crisis, as even Prabal was saying, a lot of companies that came into existence, the digital companies, Alibaba or other companies, came because of that behavioral change that happened. And right now also what you are hinting at is that we have to look at, the intelligent investor has to look at from a very macro perspective and look at various changes which will happen. So very important
point, Gaurav, which I just wanted to mention, if I have to take a cue from the public market, there are quite a few pharma stocks which are now trading at 52-week high. So in all this gloom and doom, there is somebody who is sitting there to take benefit of the opportunity and buying stocks.
And I should not mention, but I will still mention that China is also trying to take maximum opportunity. Which
It's about how do you sit back, relax, have ice in the belly, and then
So mindfulness, I think, becomes a very, very important trait for all the investors also, and behavioral economics becomes very important and critical for all of us.
Absolutely.
And I think a very, very important point, Sunil, because this is the time when investors can actually make a difference to the society and also do some impact investing and also make money. So there are a lot of opportunities which are floating around, but we need to be careful and we need to select the best opportunity which can maximize the returns. So thanks, Sunil. And now I will go to our next panelist, which is Dr. Abhishek Sharma. Dr. Abhishek Sharma is a lead pharma and healthcare analyst at IIFL Institutional Equities. He has worked in healthcare and finance for the last 17 years. He is a doctor from Maulana Azad Medical College, and then he has done his graduation from IIM. Dr. Abhishek, you have been closely tracking healthcare sector for a very long time now. I have read a lot of your reports and they are wonderful on the subsectors, the pharmaceutical, the diagnostic, the healthcare hospital. So a lot of reports that you publish are fantastic. Can you please share your insights on two current critical segments of healthcare, pharmaceutical and diagnostic? And why I'm saying these are two critical and not hospital and maybe others. Everything is critical right now. Healthcare as a sector globally has become very critical for all the governments, stakeholders, communities. Everybody has realized that healthcare has to be at the top. If you don't have healthy nation, you cannot achieve your economic goals. But in healthcare, I think pharmaceutical, why I'm saying we need your inputs and updates, because vaccine, I think, is very critical to end this trauma and torture that everybody is facing and this crisis that everybody is facing. So we want to understand that particular aspect. And also another important aspect, which I think some of the previous speaker, particularly Sunil, has mentioned about the self-sustainability. And in pharmaceutical, unfortunately, we are not self-sustainable. And it will be a very bad situation for us if this continues. So we wanted your inputs on particularly the pharmaceutical, and then comes diagnostic. Diagnostic again is extremely important till the vaccine emerges in the short term. But overall, in the long term also, diagnostic plays a very important role in the healthcare industry. So over to you, Dr. Abhishek, for your views.
Thanks, Gaurav. Thanks for that introduction. Thank you for all the panelists for giving a very comprehensive and information-rich presentation. So I'll talk about pharma and diagnostics, as Gaurav mentioned. I'll try to sort of include some COVID-related data points around each of the sectors, just to highlight, some of the things that I'm trying to say. So I think as far as finished formulation is concerned, clearly India remains and will only emerge stronger as the hub of global manufacturing. For the US generics market, for example, we supply 40% of the total generic volumes, and those volumes, the volume share has only been going higher. It would continue to go higher. Right now, if you see the kind of drugs that are being pursued in order to find a treatment, these are all repurposed drugs. And whatever you look at, ultimately the manufacturing of that, a large part of manufacturing of that would eventually come to India. HCQS, hydroxychloroquine, is a prime example. Everybody has seen Trump's tweet. The kind of dependence that people have on India only got highlighted. Even if you talk about the Gilead drug, remdesivir, Gilead is primarily a virtual company. They would rely on manufacturing partners, and right now they're getting their stuff manufactured, API manufactured in China. But my sense is that once Indian companies are able to offer them alternate sources of manufacturing, perhaps remdesivir, if it gets approved, will also start getting manufactured in India. If you also look at Gilead's, prior arrangement for Sovaldi for emerging markets, anyways, the license would come to Indian manufacturers. As far as vaccine is concerned, you've seen Serum Institute has committed that they would sort of try to scale up some of the vaccines that are in the pipeline right now, including the Oxford trial. What India lacks presently is clearly on the innovation side. So we are dependent on external partners. We are not doing real R&D of our own. That has been, the kind of thing that we operate from. But as far as the manufacturing of any of these things is concerned, my sense is a large part of that share would come to India. Coming to some geopolitical situation, you also saw Peter Navarro, who's the Director of Trade and Manufacturing Policy for the Trump administration, clearly stating that they want to reduce their dependency on China, which basically means that a large part of the API dependency that India also has to China has to kind of get de-risked by some of that API manufacturing shifting to India. For critical APIs, US obviously would want the facilities be set up on their own geography, and I guess the natural partners of choice for them would be Indian manufacturers. The Indian government has also announced a 10,000 crore policy, because of which you would see that there are some 60 to 70 APIs identified. Within the next 2 to 3 years, they will start getting manufactured in India, which will thereby reduce a lot of dependency that India has on China. So my sense is overall, these are very good times for pharma, as Sunil mentioned before me. And that's why, the investors are reacting to the kind of good news that this sector is seeing, after a very long time. Now, also, I wanted to point out that big pharma facilities across the world are in shutdown right now, which also would lead to global shortages of medicines. And what we have seen in HCQS, you can expect that ultimately Indian manufacturers will be required or asked to step in to fill in some of those product shortages. And my sense is that there are Indian companies, Indian pharma companies in my coverage, who are basically keeping a track of these supply chain situations on a daily basis. And if they see a shortage kind of a situation, they are ready to step in. So Indian companies are also playing, that kind of a service aspect to it, and at the same time, which makes commercial sense. Clearly, there are near-term issues. For example, when India GDP takes a hit, pharma consumption in India goes down. My sense is, more impact on antibiotic and acute care, but chronic like diabetes, etc., I think the impact should be lesser. But overall, pharma growth would be soft this year in India. But these are transient issues. Even more transient is what we are seeing in supply chain, which is basically lack of trucking and lack of availability of manpower in facilities. But I presume that by next month, most of these things would get resolved. So basically, good times for Indian pharma. Coming to diagnostics, what India right now is doing is about 40,000 tests per day. And if I look at testing per million data, which I just pulled out, so India tests per million right now, cumulative is about 462. US is at 15,000. So there's a big gap that we basically need to sort of cover. India has to test much more aggressively if we have to have the confidence to be able to come out of this lockdown pretty soon. And there is also state level disparity. So 45%. So there are 9 states which account for 45% of total population, which account for total 80%, 88% of India's caseload. Whereas if you look at UP, Bihar, and West Bengal, they account for 30% of India's population, but only 8.7% of total caseload. So these statewide disparities also have to go, and poorer states have to start testing much more aggressively for India to develop some sort of confidence to come out of the lockdown. As far as private labs are concerned, we are basically seeing we are seeing a significant drop in footfalls. So out of the original, only 10 to 20% kind of footfalls are happening. Some of this will get compensated by COVID testing that the private labs are now undertaking, but my sense is it won't be sufficient. So diagnostics, I guess there is some tough times ahead. 2-3 quarters will continue to be tough. COVID testing price, again, just wanted to point out, government has fixed the ceiling of 4,500 rupees. But my sense is there is pricing pressure there. So, the margin that companies could make on some of these things would continue to get lower. Final thing I wanted to say is that as far as testing device, testing kits, etc., is concerned, there has been a near complete import dependence. But during this crisis, there has been a heartening kind of a move. My lab has emerged as a leading supplier of testing kits for RT-PCR tests. So we are seeing, some sort of reduction of import dependence and emergence of Indian companies in this space. So, there are clearly good things which have happened to pharma and diagnostics. And I believe that, Indian companies would rise to the occasion to be able to fulfill the service requirements. Thanks.
Thanks, Dr. Abhishek. And I think very important points. And one question, I think, so I would request all panelists, there are questions in the question and answer section. So please, you can go through it. And in the end, I'll be asking you all the questions. But Abhishek, on the chat itself, there was a question. So I'll maybe ask before we proceed. So Swadesh Behra from Boston Scientific has a specific question for you. When we are talking about the shifting of the manufacturing base from China to India, what fiscal and non-fiscal interventions should government provide to accelerate this change? And I think it is very important change because we as a country need more manufacturing to come to India because we create more employment opportunities. But what is the government support that I think can make it happen? And Abhishek, this will go to you, and then maybe I will request Sunil also to maybe for 2 minutes just talk about this. So Abhishek.
Yeah, so basically, see, some movement has happened. Indian government has announced a 10,000 crore scheme to basically set up API production parks in India. I think if you look at more than the money, what happens is, see, right now there's a near complete dependence. I would say 80 to 90% dependence on China, whether it is related to API or key starting materials. Either direct or derived, something or the other would eventually come from China. I don't think we can take that 80% kind of dependence down to even 40. There are things in which we just can't achieve, we can't match the kind of scale that China has already built. But if there are critical APIs, let's suppose there are 70 to 100 critical APIs that a country needs to be fully independent, and we are able to sort of bring those in and try to vertically integrate their production as much as possible. What you basically need is ecosystem. You need companies who are looking to invest, try to vertically integrate into these. You need manpower, you need whole host of chemists. India used to have a lot of chemistry skills, a lot of API manufacturing advantages even 15, 20 years back. And then basically all that expertise essentially shifted to formulation, and China clearly won in the API side. So I would say policy incentives clearly, as and when government announces, plus the API tech parks, the Indian entrepreneurs have to essentially come together. If they see the economic merit, I clearly see that there is an economic merit today. When I speak to Indian companies, Indian formulation manufacturers, they don't want to source everything from China. They're basically saying that if there is an Indian source, we would like to take at least 30% of our requirement from the Indian source, just to keep him alive, so that we don't see the kind of supply shocks that we've seen. These kind of events eventually could possibly get India back into the ecosystem, which could lead to the resurgence of API manufacturing.
Thanks, Dr. Abhishek. And maybe Sunil, if you can also put your point on this, particularly on the government support on how to accelerate this change.
Yeah, so as Abhishek mentioned, government has already started. So while it was always in the offing of coming out with incentives to promote API, because all governments are now realizing that dependence on China, is not good for the industry. So it's not something that's new in the mind of the government. But now, obviously, with this COVID, since there was a significant amount of supply chain breakdown, the government has now started to take steps. The first of which, Abhishek mentioned. What I also hear is that sooner than later there will be an import duty. I don't know what is going to be the name, but some people are saying it will be a COVID 15% kind of an import duty, basically to encourage domestic production and consumption of APIs. Also, what I hear is that the norms for the effluent treatment plant has been lowered down a bit, just to manage the current situation. But I guess we should look at long-term opportunity, which is how do you incentivize promoters to start API production in India. And a couple of ways it can be done is there is a parallel import which is happening. So even while there is a ban or a significant amount of import duty, a parallel import through different structures are happening in the countries. That needs to be clamped down. The second way to do this is that lots of foreign governments have now realized that reliance on China is becoming tricky for everybody. So India is in a very good spot to go and take up that opportunity. So some countries which will benefit out of this, outflow from China are going to be Vietnam, Thailand, and India. If I look at the pharma sector, so the government should be proactive in taking it up with those foreign countries, including US and some of the larger European countries, to see if there can be a joint program to help promote API production in India. The third is there should be preference for companies which have the entire backend or the upstream, localized upstream in the pharma sector as far as government purchases are concerned, because government is a big purchaser, be it in the retail form or be it in the hospitals. So these are some of the big measures that the government can take, to promote localized production of API.
Thanks, Sunil. And now we will come on to our next esteemed panelist, Sachin. And Sachin has over 20 years of experience in diverse domains, ranging from consumer electronics, e-commerce, retails, and ITES. He is currently the president of Mumbai Angel, which is a premier platform in India focused on venture investing. And Sachin, it is estimated that the global startup economy has created nearly $3 trillion in economic value between 2016 and 2018. Now, billions of dollars of that economic value may be leaking away, likely by the day. Coronavirus is shaping up to be a perfect storm for the startup ecosystem with simultaneous impact around demand destruction, supply chain distribution, and funding dislocation. So all these three, I think, are being impacted: demand destruction, supply chain disruption, and funding dislocation. What is your assessment of the impact of this pandemic on the Indian startup ecosystem? And what are the attractive opportunities arising out of this chaos? And most importantly, Sachin, if you can also highlight what role Mumbai Angel is playing as a catalyst in this uncertain time to support the startup ecosystem, because we know that Mumbai Angel has a lot of angel investors, and they are have been a big support to the startup ecosystem in India. So this is a critical time when I think all the startups need your valuable support. So if you can highlight those points.
Sure.
Thanks. Over to you.
Thanks, Gaurav. Firstly, thanks for having me around. And yes, this is, like every single panelist has said, these are absolutely, trying times, for all of us. Before I step into the actual, discussion, just a quick context of who or what Mumbai Angels Network is for those who are not familiar. So we came into existence in 2006, 2007. The early success of Inmobi Mintra helped us to grow the network to its current size of close to 500 HNI, super HNI folks like you across 9 Indian cities. We have invested in almost 130 startups so far since inception, an amount of almost 150 CR.
Sachin, if I can so if you can put this speaker near to your, yes.
Yeah, is it better now?
Yeah, better, yes.
Thank you so much. And we have invested in around 130 companies, around 150 CR. So as you know, we certainly seem to be, at a vantage point in terms of understanding, the startup ecosystem. And one thing that sort of jumps up, and I'm sure you would agree, that perhaps, as a class of, as an asset class or as a class of people, represent a certain section of the industry, the startups seem to be the most, how should I put it, ready for, any kind of disaster, because considering the high mortality rate that startup founders are used to, it's almost, okay to believe that they start with the assumption that they are going to, sort of swim with the sharks, or for that matter, they are going to swim with the black swans and the red swans and, swans of any color. So to a certain extent, what we are seeing is a huge resilience, from the startup founders. It was almost as if they were prepared mentally that, hey, you know what, the business that we are in, it's almost like they say in Hindi, like, sar pe kafan band ke khade hue hai. So it doesn't matter what is the nature of the calamity or what is the nature of, the disturbance, but we were sort of used to it. So obviously this is a far bigger, threat than anybody could have ever envisaged. But what we are certainly seeing is that, from so many founders we are speaking to, the sheer resilience, the ability to take that in the stride, and most importantly, to adapt to the circumstances on the fly, is something that's, hugely commendable. As many of you would know, there is a very theoretical exercise that startup founders are expected to do when they start the business, which is a question which they are asked, which is, how many rats have you killed? Where rats are not the real rats that cause plague, but rat is an acronym for the real threat, or the real assumption, or the riskiest assumption that they are supposed to sort of counter. So for example, just to drive home this point, if a startup is in baby care products, the riskiest assumption they have to deal with is what happens if babies stop getting born, right? So that's the riskiest assumption. And each startup has the riskiest assumption, which they believe will sort of not come into play during their lifetimes, and they deal with maybe serial number 3, 4, 5. What we have seen now is a scenario where the riskiest assumption that should never happen to a startup, or perhaps something that startups never envisaged, are hitting them. In fact, if I were to do a very, very broad sweep, I know this generalization may not be entirely accurate, but if I had to do a very broad sweep, maybe 15% of the startups have actually realized that they're staring at this rat, so to say, where the product market fit has evaporated, where the business model has evaporated. For example, we invested in an events company which specializes in being the marketplace to have events done at a very cost effective way, marrying all the stakeholders, players. Imagine no events happening, right? There's a company we invested in a year back, which basically makes the luggage movement to international aircrafts and international airports far easier. Imagine there's nothing to transport, there's no passengers flying anywhere. So we see 15% almost of the startups who are really staring at this kind of a rat, speedily adapting to figuring out what they should be doing now. There are maybe at the other end of the spectrum, maybe 10 or 15% of the startups who are substantially insulated, while no one is completely insulated, but substantially insulated. For example, there's a startup we invested in that plans to sort of disrupt the lithium-ion battery space using graphene-based supercapacitors. They are in a research phase. It's not as if the crisis is going to make them change anything that they're doing, right now. But there is a whole 70-80% of startups in between that are seeing, anywhere between 10 to 50% compression in revenues. Literally like, the world has sort of fallen apart. But to my earlier point, again, we see, a lot of startups, are sort of almost, underlining the Darwinian theory, so to say, which is, the survival of the fittest. And finally, those species survive that are the most, sort of amenable to change, that adapt change more easily than others. And I don't think it would be an exaggeration to say, Gaurav, that, that the startup community is perhaps, responding the best, I would say, to this crisis, partly because they're mentally conditioned, because they know that they're actually in a war zone ever since they started, being in business, on day one. And perhaps the nature of the beast, perhaps the fact that they're dealing with, crisis day in and day out, with resources far, far limited, than other entities, are making them, much more, stronger. But what we're also seeing, as a trend, is that a lot of helping hands are coming forward. And when we say helping hands, not just lip service, but concrete hands. So for example, you would recollect, Gaurav, you were on the panel of a virtual life sciences discussion that we did maybe 3 weeks back, maximum 2 or 3 weeks back. And we had showcased a lot of startups there. And you'd be surprised, one of a fairly large pharma company, I can't name that right now because it's confidential, a large pharma company was one of the attendees. They looked at the startup who's planning to do some fairly disruptive work for ostomy patients. They wanted to have a look at the deck. They're MA members, so obviously they had access to all the information we have. And perhaps, by next week, we'll be announcing a fairly large infusion that this pharma company is doing, because they realize that in times, even in normal times, these kind of initiatives were required. But if they had to adapt now to the changing circumstances, they're going to need far nimble players, far nimble teams to sort of face the onslaught. And sometimes, as they say, making the elephant dance is always a possibility. But if this elephant has a few ponies around it, for want of a better word, that can run faster, why not? In fact, I was talking to, surprisingly, HR head, of an organization who made that investment in one of the startups, and it was a fairly significant investment, around 2 CR. And I said, look, it's quite strange, that from the HR perspective, you're spearheading this. Usually, we see other functions, R&D, and other functions driving this conversations. And he said, look, these are multiple, ways to look at it. But the way I see it, I'm investing in extremely quality talent that is perhaps going to cost me, I don't know what, 1.5 or 2 CR, as a one-time investment. It's not even an annual CTC. I've invested in that talent. I'm now a shareholder. And these people, as long as I don't smother them with my overheads, as long as I don't smother them with my practices of a larger organization, are actually, perhaps going to deliver far better numbers, whether it's the return on investment, whether it is ROCE. So this is certainly a direction we want to take. And you'd be surprised, Gaurav, this is a trend we are seeing with a lot of startups, who are actually getting, conversations or knocks on their door from corporates across the sector. One of the the easiest to recall is there is a startup that basically does work, in the audio diagnostics. You could cough in a cell phone, and somebody sitting 1,000 kilometers away could figure out whether you have a lung disease. Imagine that's fodder for some of the corporates. But even a corporate that's planning, even a startup that's planning to assess road condition using disruptive technologies is in demand. So I would say, from the context of resilience, the startup founders are absolutely, rising to the occasion. What we have also done to address a part of the question you had asked in terms of what is Mumbai Angels doing. So we are obviously making sure that, we open conversations with as many corporates as possible, including, I would like to make a submission to all the esteemed panelists. Anybody who thinks, that they would like to sort of get closer to what's happening in the startup ecosystem, we would love to welcome them to become, officially, part of the Mumbai Angels fraternity. But we are initiating these conversations a lot because at this stage, what startups need are not just words of encouragement, but just a concrete support. Hey, you know what? My distribution chain is available to you. And obviously, this is not a CSR budget. We will cut out a very strong commercial arrangement, which is win-win for everybody. And startups are absolutely fine with that. But one initiative that's causing a lot of excitement within the startup ecosystem is the Startup Lifeline Infusion Program, where we are putting fairly small sums, anything from as small as 2 or 5 lakhs to maybe 50 lakhs to startups without due diligence, without the detailed investment note, purely on the basis of certain documents that they share. And we would have thought that the hard-nosed investors, would have been a little apprehensive about trying to participate in this program, saying, hey, you know what, I want to visit the facility, I want to do the whole 9 yards. But we are seeing some interesting trends where the investor says, look, and we have, of course, designed the deal in such a way where the investors will have a 40% discount to the next round. But investors are saying, look, I understand, these are difficult times. I don't mind taking a small bet at this stage because it is meant as an infusion. And I mind you, I'm not doing charity. As an investor, I'm not at all doing charity. I'm actually helping the startup in their times of need and making sure that if they can sort of come out of their crisis, smelling of roses, we would be happy to make fairly large sort of infusion. So these are some of the observations we are seeing from our side, Gaurav.
Thanks, Sachin. And I think a very important point that the tenacity that some of the startups are exhibiting in this crisis time, I think we salute their spirit. And I just remember a share on this. वक्त को जरा वक्त दे, ये वक्त भी गुजर जाएगा, कितनी भी काली रात हो, नया सवेरा जरूर आएगा. So I think all these startups deserve a real salute, and I know a lot of startups are also working on innovative range of products for the COVID-19 crisis. So I will now go on to our last speaker, and we have reserved one of our best speaker for the last, Mr. Danny Kurian. Danny has more than 25 years of experience in media, investing, and entrepreneurships. He is the president and CEO of Keiretsu Forum, which is a global investment community of accredited private equity angel investors, venture capitalists, and corporate institutional investors. Danny has been a business journalist for multiple media organizations like Financial Express, Business Standard, Dow Jones Newswires, and the Wall Street Journal. So Danny, what is your assessment of the impact of this pandemic on the Indian startup ecosystem? And also from your perspective, what are the attractive opportunities arising out of this chaos? And again, what role does Kiritsu Forum is playing as a catalyst to support the startup ecosystem in India? Over to you, Danny.
Thank you. Thank you, Gaurav. Let me very quickly check, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, it's always a challenge to go as the last speaker, but I'm glad I did that today, especially after Sunil and Sachin went. As Prabal and many others were saying, there have been a barrage of webinars of late as people are sitting at home. And as you dial into more and more of these, while you very well know that this is one of the worst crises that we are going through, that message is being drilled into you even more fiercely. So, you know, at times you come out more pessimistic, more depressed out of many of these conferences. And then you have investors speaking and talking about opportunities in this crisis. So we almost look like vultures, you know, waiting for opportunities in times of crisis. But having Sunil explain that there is actually 2 trillion worth of dry powder out there, and having Sachin explained how some of the startups are actually in a much better position to be taking advantage of these opportunities because they are much more agile than some of the large corporations. Let me focus a little bit more on what investors can look at. But before that, very quickly, let me introduce what Keiretsu Forum is. All I would say is that we do very similar work as Mumbai Angels, looking at opportunities for investors. The only difference is that we are a global organization. It's been around for about 20 years now, based in the US, but with about 56 chapters around the world, and one of the biggest number of fundings last year. Now, let me, take it a little lighter. It's been a very serious discussion talking about problems. Certainly, there is no debate that this is one of the worst crises that we are going through. I think the only debate is whether the recovery is going to be in the shape of a V or a U or a W, or it's not even going to happen for a long time and it remains in the shape of an L. But there is also another way of looking at it. Any disruption to daily routine is in some sense a signal. For example, if you catch a little fever, I know these days it's more scary with the COVID context, but otherwise it's just a sign that your body needs a break, it needs some rest, and probably it needs some time to heal and rebound. Similarly, probably the COVID pandemic is also a signal that the world needed to slow and take a break to heal. And I hope all of you who are forced to stay at home had a good break, first of all, even though it took a forced shutdown to make that happen. So it's not all bad as far as I'm concerned. It's been a good break, and I think these are one of those times when you, like they say, get on the balcony and take a view on how things were going, what the opportunities are, and how you want to proceed. But all good things will come to an end, and we will soon be forced back to our routines. We may continue to debate whether the recovery is going to be in what shape, but there is no debate that probably within another week or two, we will be forced to be back to our routines. And what I do as a routine is to look at early stage companies to invest, both as an investor personally and also as someone who's running Keiretsu Forum, which is a collective of investors. Gaurav, as you had earlier mentioned, there have been estimates which said that the global startup economy had created some $2 to $3 trillion in economic value over the last couple of years. And with the corona lockdown now happening around the world, there is also a fear that billions of dollars of that value may be leaking away through destruction of demand, disruptions to supply at times, And most importantly, because of the disappearance of funding options for companies. And very often for early stage companies, funding is one of the most critical components, even if they are doing well otherwise, for them to survive. Now, this is true to an extent because any crisis brings with it pain, and it does cause some churn, and sometimes a lot of churn. But as many of you also rightly said, with every crisis in the past, uh, there have been opportunities, and it's not going to be any different this time either. Disruptive companies with sustainable models and operations will come out much stronger. Um, as Badri and many others mentioned earlier, unlike in some of the previous crises where it was the financial community which was leading from the front, this time it is the healthcare and pharma community which is at the forefront of fighting this crisis. But I would also add that even the very definition of what is pharma and what is healthcare is changing as a result of this crisis. For example, I'll just tell you that 3 out of the companies, portfolio companies, which we had invested in through Keritsu, which have come up with very relevant products for the current crisis, are not pharma companies. One is an IoT company which had products for geofencing and so on. They've already got an order from the Apollo chain of hospitals. They are working with similar chains in Japan. I'm talking about a company called SenseKiss. Won't go into the details. Another one is a company which was actually working on developing a tractor of all things, an autonomous um, electric tractor, but they were also in office automation. And they have already started work on devising a number of robots which can help in sanitizing facilities, treat people, and so on. And the third is a company which was actually in aerospace. And a year back, they had designed a product for Airbus, where they had designed a ceiling mounted infrared sanitizer for the seats for airplanes. At that point, the view was that if you could make this automated and infrared based as opposed to physical cleaning of the aircraft after it lands, you could actually make the turnaround much faster, and therefore the airplanes could be longer in air and therefore be much more optimized. Now, none of these were actually pharma companies, but these are some of the companies which are really leading from the front when it comes to innovation. Now, how does it all affect investors? Obviously, these are all opportunities, and it is normal that growth stage valuations drop during events like this. But that also allows those people with liquidity to invest at very compelling valuations, both in the public markets as well as in the private markets. And in fact, those who actually deployed capital during the 2008 financial crisis were actually the ones who were rewarded with some of the best companies and returns one could really ask for. And I think there is no difference going to be this time too. Growth stage valuations will come down if they haven't already come down, and it will be quite a sharp decline. But if you look at the previous crisis in 2008, the financial crisis as an example, the valuations which very sharply fell in 2008, 2009, took only about 18 months to get back to pre-recession levels from the 2009 bottom. And we all know that the public markets took much longer to get back to where they were before the crisis started. So then, should we all rush to invest into startups? That's an interesting question. And while there are opportunities plenty, investors have also got to navigate through the uncontrolled barrage of information hitting them. And this is all the more so now with proliferation of communication devices, be it this or WhatsApp or social media. There is too much of information happening out there being shared. And a large part of this flow is either not relevant or sometimes even more dangerously is actually misinformation. And therefore, being skeptical and questioning is probably the simple, most useful tool to start with if you are an investor. The other, of course, is to find a structured process or a platform. It could be Keritsu Forum, it could be Mumbai Angels, it could be something else. And with this, I want to come to the point which you raised. What is it that organizations like Keritsu are doing to help investors and companies in times like this? I will not go into detail, but I'll just share one example to tell you why, being a part of a network, a structure is important, especially in times like this. With COVID raising its head and people forced to stay at home about a month back or a little over a month back, investors very quickly realized that Zoom, which is a platform we are using now to do this webinar, could be a major beneficiary. And on a certain day in the second half of February, the shares of Zoom Technologies went up by almost 80% in a matter of just 2 hours of trading.
I think we have lost Danny, or the signal has some issue. So there are 2 or 3 questions that I will take up, which people have asked. So my first question is for Prabal. Prabal, this question is from Saras Malik from Artemis Hospitals. She's talking about, please guide on how to be future ready if normalcy takes a longer time than expected. So Prabal, if you can answer that question. Prabal, are you able to hear me? Prabal, we can't. Okay, so I'll pass on the question. The next question is for Achal. Achal, what is? Can you suggest the details on work from home efficacy? This question is from Bijal Shah. He's asking about the work from home efficacy, any study that has been done or any insights that Sharam has done in the recent time.
I would be more than happy to share the work from home efficacy. But my personal experience and everybody in SHRM is following. In my past experience also in GE and all, they were work from home etiquette. And the first and most important thing is that you should have your space. Get ready as if you're going to office in the morning. So get ready 9 a.m. and you should not leave your desk, just take the 15-minute break or whatever bio break you need to take. You need to think whatever space you have is your work. And my humble request is that you should get ready, wear your suit. Please never sit in your pajamas when you're working from home, because then psychologically you are ready, and you should maintain the discipline at home as if it is work. Like, I'll just give you an example. When you do a small puja at your home, you follow certain discipline. You will dress up. You will not go in a pajamas or whatever it is without taking a bath in your mandir. Similarly, your work from home is also your little temple, and follow that discipline. But I would be more than happy to share the more detailed research which we have done and findings. I will share it with Gaurav, and he can send it to everybody, all the people who are attending the webinar.
Thanks, Achal. And my next question is to Badri. Badri, there is a question from Ankit Juneja, and he's talking about the healthcare industry is leading from the front in this COVID-19 crisis. They are putting in all their efforts, all their resources to make sure that we overcome this challenge. And they are working with the government, they are working with the authorities. But the question that is being highlighted by Ankit is that there is a lot of fiscal losses which are happening to the healthcare industry overall, but particularly to the hospital segment. And what are the interventions that we should, that the government should take to make sure that our healthcare industry or our hospital industry does not succumb to the COVID-19 crisis? It is very, very important that we have to strengthen our healthcare. We have to strengthen our hospital, because we all know that there are a lot of gaps in the public infrastructure. But how do we make sure that the healthcare industry survives? And you being from the FICCI, I think can put on your point. And Prabal, if you are able to listen to my voice, you can also put your points on this, because this is a very important question. Healthcare is doing all it can to fight this crisis, but we all know that there is a lot of money which is pending with the government. They have still not released the CGHS and ECHS payments, and there is a lot of cash flow crisis that hospitals are facing. And I think Sunil also understands this. So I think if together all three of you can take 2 minutes each and put your thoughts on this. This is very critical question, and thanks for asking this. First, I think Badri, and then Prabal, and I think Sunil, then you can go for it.
Okay, so good question, Ankit. So number one is, I think
Badri, we are not able to hear you. If you can come after Prabal. Prabal, can you take the question, and then Badri can come once his...
I'm not able to hear properly, actually. It's breaking on the way, your voice. So I'm not...
hear you.
No, you asked a question about how to be future ready.
If you can hear me, I'm back.
Yeah. Gaurav, can you hear me?
Badri, yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
Okay, so you take the question, and then we'll go to Prabal.
Okay, so first is, I think there are about 6 odd points that the hospital industry faces as challenge, which I think at the top of it is basically the CGHS, ECHS, which was raised by most provider groups. Happy to let you know that since we were part of the provider groups, the medical device industry and government was part of a WhatsApp group where this was all discussed, and there was a video conference with the Empowered Committee on Healthcare. Post which Mr. C.K. Mishra, who's the chair of the Empowered Committee, made sure that he wrote to all the secretaries who are needed to kind of act on it. Day before yesterday, the first tranche of payment has started flowing out to the hospital industry. And it was very widely acknowledged in the WhatsApp group between government, MedTech companies and provider groups on the easing up of some of the payment releases that have started to happen since day before yesterday. That's number one. Number two, I think, as Ankit's question was around what's the total size of the industry, fiscal loss of the healthcare so far. Roughly about $6 to $7 billion per month is the impact. And how much loss is recoverable in the coming quarter or months? I think if you look at China today, in terms of recovery, China seems to have headed towards a V. But as I said, and Prabal also mentioned, saying that we might more go towards W. So a quarter of a recovery in the next 3 months might happen because of surge of elective procedures. But long-term depends on the safety perception created for return to hospitals towards a COVID-free procedure for every patient. And the third question was any government policy to increase elective surgeries to help hospitals and medical device industry. Absolutely, there are discussions in progress. Different states are adopting different approaches. From a center perspective, I think the center has created 3 zones, the green, orange, and the red zones, hotspots, so to say. The CMOs, the state CMOs are basically looking at releasing some of the hospitals depending upon the zones that they are in and the measures that the hospitals have towards ensuring that they continue to remain COVID-free. So these are discussions in progress. Probably by next week, we should have some good understanding of how this is going to be addressed. I hope that helps, Gaurav.
Yeah, thanks, Badri. Prabal, can you hear me now?
Yeah. So, Gaurav, let me. I think Badri's response was pretty comprehensive. Let me just comment on the question that how to be future ready. Okay, if it extends beyond 2 to 3 months. Okay, one thing which is absolutely not known is the nature of this virus. And as all experts are talking about it, that there could be second wave, there could be third wave. And I would allude to what perhaps Badri had mentioned earlier, that one has to really start planning one's business, keeping the worst case scenario in mind. So normally in business planning or strategic planning, we talk in terms of a kind of optimistic view, a more real kind of a view, and then there's a pessimistic view. In this particular situation, in a normal situation, we go for what is likely to happen. But in this situation, I think one should really think in terms of the worst case scenario and start planning one's business in accordance with that. And based on whatever information that we have, that before the vaccine is really developed, okay, the chances are that it's going to be absolutely topsy-turvy. It's impossible to predict that where the virus is going to crop up. Okay? So a green zone can suddenly become a red zone. A cluster may come suddenly somewhere. Okay, a containment zone can happen somewhere. So the entire thing, the entire running of a business is going to be very, very challenging in the next 6 months to 12 months time frame. So I think it's best to mentally be prepared that this is the real situation that is going to be, and accordingly prepare for the coming next 1 year. So that's how I would look at it. There's no definite answers to it because the situation is so complex, but I suppose I would take that step.
So thank you, Prabal. And Sunil, any thoughts on how do we ensure that healthcare industry survives? And even though it is fighting this crisis, we have to make sure that it survives and thrives in this crisis.
So, as Prabal mentioned, I think Badri captured it comprehensively. But just one additional point I would like to come in with is that, hospitals should look at both external as well as internal on the survival. External, obviously, there needs to be some support from the government, and as Badri mentioned, they've already started to support through releasing of the old payments. In some states, there is a request that government should start bearing some percentage of the cost. So there are talks. Karnataka, I guess, is where there is a proposal that government should chip in. It's important. At the end of the day, you need hospitals and you need solvent hospitals. So that's the external part of how we can look at this thing. There is one other nuance to it, that there are lots of DFIs who are now coming forward, at least for our portfolio companies. I know we have few DFIs who are now supporting some of our hospitals with COVID related expenses. So any expense that is related to, so like PPEs or employee logistics, these are additional costs which are loaded up on the hospital just because they are servicing COVID patients. So those hospitals should either through the government try and approach DFIs, or should also make that attempt to reach out to those kind of DFIs. So those are external. As far as internal is concerned, and that is also it ties into the future ready, is that this is the time when you have to sit back and understand that what has been the biggest pain point, be it on the revenue side or be it on the cost side, and see what all you could have done differently, in order to manage revenue or cost. So if I bring in some elements like access, that today, can you still go out and do an OPD through a teleconsultation? Can you install, because this is going to be the future. So, if you have to be future ready, you do it now. Your doctors are sitting somewhere. You can still run an OPD through a teleconsultation. And you can install teleconsultation infrastructure today because this still forms part of essential services. How do you harness behavioral change? I'm bringing up all the elements that I mentioned earlier, which hospitals can use and do it. And they have the time today, some of, especially people who are on the planning strategy side, to be able to manage it. How do you get into resource management? Do we need these number of workers? Can we change the workflow? Can we use digitization? Can we use IT enabled workflow to lower down the number of employees? Because at the end of the day, you have to be efficient. A business continuity plan, what could you have done differently? If you had a choice of 10 more days before the lockdown, what could you have done for business continuity? So, patient therapy continuity program. Can a hospital launch an app or partner with somebody to run a digital therapy program for patients, so that patients are able, you can monitor, track, support patients who are on chronic who are suffering from chronic disease. So these are things. Wellness, again, sorry, one other point, wellness. How can you promote that wellness? So these are things that you can do even now, both in terms of strategizing, and in some parts you can implement it, and more importantly, be future ready when everything is behind us, and we are doing business as usual.
So thanks, Sunil. And I would say that nothing is permanent. Don't stress yourself too much, because no matter what, how bad the situation is, it will change. So with this, we come to an end. And I think it was a pleasure to host this fantastic panel. A lot of people say that it must be very difficult to host such kind of and be a moderator for such distinguished panel. I said my job is very easy because I have a very distinguished panel. So it's a pleasure hosting such a nice panel. And before we end, I just want to say a very important message. I think few lines from Gulzar. बेवजह घर से निकलने की जरूरत क्या है, मौत से आंखें मिलाने की जरूरत क्या है, सबको मालूम है बाहर की हवा है कातिल, यूं ही कातिल से उलझने की जरूरत क्या है, जिंदगी एक नेमत है उसे संभाल के रखो, कब्र गाहों को सजाने की जरूरत क्या है, दिल बहलाने के लिए घर में वजह है काफी, यूं ही गलियों में भटकने की जरूरत क्या है. So I think very important that we stay safe, we stay at home, and when the time comes, we go out and make a difference. So we hope and pray that you and your loved ones are safe, and we thank all our participants. We thank each one of you for taking out time. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure hosting you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gaurav.
Thanks, Gaurav. Fantastic session. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.